Apache girl whispered. "If I please you tonight, will you keep me forever?" The desert was quiet that evening, the sun sinking low behind the rugged hills, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and pink. This wind carried the soft scent of sage and the faint warmth of the earth that had baked under the sun all day. On the edge of the small Apache reservation, a young woman walked along the dusty path, her steps careful but confident. Her dark hair was tied loosely, the tips brushing her shoulders, and her eyes carried both strength and a hidden sadness. She was used to moving through the world with caution, always aware of the past and the way people had let her down before. Yet there was a quiet fire in her, a desire to find someone who could see her beyond the walls she had built. She reached the small community center where the weekly gathering was happening. The night was not just any gathering. It was the monthly community dance, a place where neighbors came together, shared stories, and celebrated life despite the hardships that often touched their small town. Music floated out of the building, the soft beat of drums mixing with the gentle strumming of a guitar. Children's laughter echoed from the playground nearby, and the aroma of fresh bread and stew wafted through the air. She paused at the doorway, watching the people inside, feeling both a pull to join and a hesitation. Inside, the room was alive with movement. People of all ages were smiling, talking, and dancing. Older women sat near the edges, their eyes soft with memories and wisdom, while younger couples swirled across the wooden floor. She felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as she stepped inside. Her presence did not go unnoticed. Conversations paused for a moment as heads turned subtly, taking in the new face who carried herself with quiet confidence. She walked toward the refreshment table, pretending to examine the snacks while her senses took in everything: the laughter, the music, the way the light hit the wooden walls, and the soft hum of conversations blending together. He noticed her almost immediately. A man in his early 30s, rugged and tall, standing near the doorway, had been helping with some preparations for the event. He was not a stranger to hard work. The dirt under his nails and the sunburn on his face told stories of long hours in the fields. Respect. Yet there was something gentle in the way he moved, a quiet awareness that made him seem both strong and approachable. He had come to the reservation for work, helping with cattle on a nearby ranch, but he quickly realized that life here moved differently. People valued respect, honesty, and connections that ran deeper than appearances. Their eyes met briefly across the room. There was a flicker of recognition, not of knowing each other before, but of understanding something unspoken. She looked away first, feeling the unfamiliar pull of curiosity mixed with caution. He smiled slightly to himself, noting her hesitation but also the way she carried herself, how she seemed rooted to the earth yet reaching for something beyond her immediate world. She found a quiet corner, balancing a cup of tea in her hands, and allowed herself to breathe. It had been a long week, and she had needed this. A chance to step out, see familiar faces, and maybe feel a little less alone. Her thoughts drifted, half listening to the music, half observing the interactions around her. Friends were sharing stories, friends were laughing at inside jokes, and the air was thick with the warmth of shared history and community. Yet even here she felt a small distance from everyone, a protective layer around her heart that refused to let anyone in too quickly. He finally made his way toward her, carrying a tray of water bottles to offer to people sitting nearby. As he approached, he spoke softly. "It's a busy night, huh?" His voice was calm, carrying a mix of curiosity and respect, never intruding. "Bye." She glanced up, surprised that someone had chosen to speak with her, and managed a small nod. "Yes," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. "But it's always lively here." He smiled, sensing her guardedness but not pushed away by it. "I'm still getting used to it," he admitted. "But everything's different from where I grew up. But I like it. People are real."
She studied him for a moment.
There was no pretense in his words, no hidden motives that she could sense. That honesty, simple as it was, felt rare and comforting. Bob, people can be strange sometimes, she said with a small, almost shy laugh. But we try to take care of each other. Then he nodded. I can see that. It's refreshing. There was a pause, a shared silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but felt meaningful. Sometimes words weren't necessary. The desert outside, the music inside, the soft hum of life, they were enough to fill the spaces between strangers meeting for the first time. As the night went on, the music changed, moving into a slower, more melodic rhythm. Couples swayed gently on the floor, and she watched them, feeling a mix of longing and hesitation. Rask. He noticed her glance, and without saying much, he offered his hand in a polite, quiet gesture. Would you like to dance? He asked. Her heart skipped a beat. Dancing was intimate, a form of connection she rarely shared with strangers. Yet something about him, the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet strength in his stance, made her nod. She placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his palm. For together they stepped onto the floor, moving in time with the slow music. At first, their movements were cautious, almost shy. Breath. She was aware of every touch, every small shift, every brush of fingers. He adjusted gently, never rushing, always letting her set the pace. In that small, simple dance, something unspoken began to form. Trust. She is. A recognition that perhaps, for the first time in a long while, she could let someone close without fear. After a few minutes, she pulled back slightly, searching his face. You're not like the others, she said softly. You don't treat me like I'm different. He shook his head. I don't see you as different, just someone I want to understand. That's all. His words were honest, stripped of exaggeration or charm. There was no pressure, no expectation, just a clear desire to know her for who she truly was. The rest of the evening passed in similar quiet moments. They laughed at small things, exchanged stories of their childhoods, and shared glances that lingered longer than necessary. For her, it was the first time in a long time that she didn't feel the need to hide pieces of herself. For him, it was the first time he met someone whose spirit matched the quiet strength he had always admired, but rarely found. When the gathering began to wind down, the lights dimmed and people started leaving. Neither of them wanted to break the connection that had quietly formed. Outside, the desert night was cool. The stars scattered like diamonds across the sky. The wind carried the soft whispers of the earth, the desert settling into its familiar rhythm. They stood together for a moment, neither speaking, both aware of the tension that hovered between them. Finally, she whispered, almost to herself, It's strange how quickly someone can feel important. He looked at her, reading both the vulnerability and the courage in her eyes.
Maybe some people are meant to be seen, he said softly.
Breaths. Not just for a moment, but for longer. She nodded, feeling the truth in his words.
And in that quiet moment under the endless sky, something shifted. It was not love, at least not yet, but the seed of trust, curiosity, and a connection that could grow into something lasting had been planted. As she walked back toward her small home that night, her heart was lighter than it had been in months. She didn't know where this would lead or if it would last, but for the first time in a long while she allowed herself to hope. And somewhere in the distance he watched the horizon, thinking about her, about the spark he felt, and wondering how two lives, so different yet so connected, could intertwine. The desert night held its silence, a witness to the meeting of two souls. It would be many days before either of them fully understood the depth of the connection formed that night, but the first step had been taken, the dance, the conversation, the quiet understanding, all of it had marked the beginning of something neither of them would forget. And in that quiet desert, under the endless stars, the Apache girl and the man who had quietly touched her world both felt it. A promise, not spoken aloud yet, that perhaps life had a way of bringing the right people together even in the most unexpected ways. Passed after their first meeting at the community dance, but neither could stop thinking about the other. The Apache girl went about her daily life, helping her family with chores, running errands, and spending quiet moments alone in the desert that always seemed to bring her calm. Yet, in every quiet moment, her thoughts drifted back to him, the man who had seen her in a way no one else had, who had treated her with respect and kindness without asking for anything in return. She found herself replaying the moments of their dance, the gentle way he had held her hand, the patience in his movements, the quiet attentiveness that made her feel safe. She had longed for someone to truly notice her, to care for her beyond the surface.
But thinking of him also made her nervous.
She was cautious by nature, and trust did not come easily. Past experiences had taught her that people often left when things became real. Meanwhile, he thought of her constantly. Every spare moment he remembered the quiet determination in her eyes, the subtle smiles she offered when she felt comfortable, and the moments of laughter that had seemed effortless. He had never met someone like her before, someone who combined strength with vulnerability in such a delicate balance. The memory of her whispering about feeling important lingered in his mind. He wanted to see her again, to learn more about her world, but he also wanted to approach her carefully. He knew he could not rush anything. Respect was everything here. Their next meeting came unexpectedly. The man had been helping at the nearby ranch, checking fences and tending to the animals, when he saw her walking along the same path she had taken the week before. Narration. She was carrying a small basket, likely full of supplies for her family.
He called out gently, not wanting to startle her.
"Hey, do you need a hand with that?" She paused, surprised but not alarmed. No, thank you." "I can manage," she said, though her lips curved into a small smile. There was a warmth in the way she spoke, a recognition that he was not like the others she had known. He nodded, understanding that pressing further was not wise.
All right.
Breath. "Just thought I'd ask," he said. Then after a brief pause he added softly, "It's good to see you again." That simple exchange was enough to bring a flutter to her heart. Bration. She nodded again, feeling a small spark of connection, and continued her walk. He followed at a careful distance, matching his pace to hers. Words were not needed immediately. The quiet companionship, the shared presence, was comforting in itself. They walked in silence for a while, letting the desert wind guide them. The sun had not yet set, and the horizon was painted in golden hues. The moment felt suspended in time, as if the desert itself was giving them space to explore this new connection. Barish. Eventually they reached a small clearing where the girl often stopped to rest. She set down her basket and sat on a smooth rock, looking out at the rolling hills. He joined her, sitting a few feet away, careful not to intrude, but close enough to share the view. "It's beautiful," he said softly.
I can see why you like it here.
She glanced at him, noticing the genuine appreciation in his eyes.
It feels
"Peaceful," she said. Away from all the noise, her voice carried a quiet honesty that made him listen more intently. "Sometimes I come here just to think, to be alone with the world." He nodded, understanding more than she realized. "I get that."
There's something about open spaces. It clears the mind, makes you see what really matters.
For the first time, the girl felt a sense of ease around him. She spoke more freely, sharing little pieces of her life, her family, the traditions she cherished, the ways she found strength in her heritage. He listened patiently, asking questions that showed interest without judgment. There was no pressure, no rush, just a steady, comforting presence. With every story shared, the trust between them grew, slowly bridging the distance that caution had built. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the desert, he finally spoke about himself. He shared stories of his upbringing, the challenges he faced on the ranch, and the lessons he had learned about patience, responsibility, and respect. She listened carefully, noticing the humility in his words and the way he seemed more comfortable revealing the quiet parts of himself, rather than boasting about accomplishments. It was refreshing to see someone so grounded, someone who did not try to impress, but simply wanted to connect. The conversation naturally shifted to lighter topics. They laughed over small mistakes he had made while learning the routines of the reservation, and she shared amusing anecdotes from her childhood. With each laugh, the tension between them eased, replaced by a sense of comfort and companionship. They began to understand each other in ways that went beyond words. The shared glances, the small gestures, the unspoken acknowledgement that this connection was different from anything they had felt before. As twilight approached, the temperature dropped and the desert took on a serene, almost magical quality. The sky darkened to deep shades of purple, and the first stars began to twinkle above. The girl shivered slightly, and he instinctively offered his jacket. "Here." "You might get cold," he said. She hesitated, then accepted it, feeling the warmth of the fabric and the care behind the gesture. It was small, but it meant something. They stayed in the clearing longer, speaking in whispers now, as if the world itself had softened to listen to their conversation. Breaths. She noticed the quiet way he looked at her, not with desire, but with genuine curiosity and respect. And in that look, she felt seen. Truly seen. It was a feeling she had rarely experienced, and it brought both comfort and fear. Comfort because it was rare to be understood, and fear because opening herself meant risking hurt if he left. Then, in a moment of unexpected vulnerability, she spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "You make it easy to talk to you."
Her eyes lowered and she added, almost as a question more than a statement, I don't usually let people in like this.
Boo.
He reached out, not touching her, but letting his hand hover near hers as a gesture of understanding. "I know," he said gently.
And I don't want to rush anything. I just want you to feel safe, to know that I'm here. Ja. She looked up, meeting his gaze. In his eyes she saw sincerity, patience, and a quiet determination. For a long moment, the desert around them was silent, holding their words and their emotions like a sacred witness. Finally, she smiled. A small, genuine smile that spoke volumes.
"Thank you," she whispered. The connection they had begun to build deepened over the next few weeks.
They found reasons to see each other, helping at community events, running errands, and sometimes simply sitting together in the desert, talking about everything and nothing. Each moment was deliberate, never forced, yet charged with the unspoken understanding that they were both feeling something significant. One evening, after helping set up for another gathering, they walked along the familiar path again. The desert was calm, the air filled with the scent of dry earth and blooming cacti. The girl's voice was quiet as she spoke, almost a whisper. Round and despair.
Sometimes I wonder if people like us can really find each other in a world that doesn't always understand.
He looked at her thoughtfully. Maybe the world doesn't understand yet, but that doesn't mean we can't try.
We can create our own understanding.
She paused, considering his words. The idea was both frightening and thrilling. She had spent so long protecting her heart, fearing loss and disappointment. But his patience, his respect, and his genuine interest made her want to take a risk, to see if perhaps love and trust could grow here, in this quiet desert, against all odds. As the night settled in, stars blanketing the sky, they stood together in silence. Words were not necessary. The trust and curiosity they had cultivated spoke louder than any conversation. And in that quiet moment, the Apache girl allowed herself to hope, even if only a little, that maybe this connection could last. Maybe, just maybe, someone had come into her life who would see her, understand her, and stay. It was during that same night, under the endless sky, that she felt the courage to ask something she had never asked before. Her voice was a soft whisper, carrying the weight of both vulnerability and desire. "If I please you tonight, will you keep me forever?" He looked at her, surprised yet touched. There was no pressure in his eyes, only honesty and contemplation. He didn't answer immediately with words. Instead, he reached out, gently taking her hand in his, letting the touch speak for him. The gesture was full of meaning, patience, care, and the promise that he would not leave her alone to face her fears. The night held its quiet magic, the desert wind wrapping around them like a protective cloak. Neither knew exactly what the future held, but for the first time both felt the possibility of something lasting: trust, understanding, and a connection that could grow into love. And in that moment, with the stars above and the desert stretching endlessly around them, the Apache girl and the man who had quietly entered her life shared an unspoken promise, one of patience, respect, and the courage to see where this bond could lead. Days turned into weeks after that quiet desert night. The Apache girl and the man had shared many moments together, small gestures, long walks, and heartfelt conversations. But life, as it often does, was about to test them in ways they had not anticipated. The girl had begun to feel a mixture of hope and worry. Her heart was drawn to him, but she could not ignore the whispers from the community, the raised eyebrows, and the questions her family might ask if they noticed how often she spent time with him. She loved her culture, her family, and the traditions that had shaped her, and she feared that opening her heart too widely might bring disapproval or misunderstanding.
At the same time, she could not deny the joy she felt when he was near.
His presence had become comforting, a constant she could rely on in a life that sometimes felt uncertain. She had started looking forward to their conversations, the way he listened without judgment, the small kindnesses he offered without expectation. Yet beneath all of this, a quiet fear lingered. Would he truly stay, or would he leave when things became more complicated? Meanwhile, he was struggling too. Work at the ranch had grown busier, and responsibilities were pulling him away from the quiet moments he cherished with her. Every day he thought about her, replaying their shared laughter, their conversations, and the gentle way she had allowed herself to trust him. But the demands of life made him question how much he could truly commit, especially knowing that her world was different from his. One afternoon, as the sun glared down on the desert, he received news that required him to leave the reservation for a few weeks. A distant relative had fallen ill, and he was expected to help manage affairs at the family ranch. It was sudden, unavoidable, and left him feeling anxious. He wanted to see her one last time before leaving, to explain, to reassure her. But he also worried about how she would react. He found her later that day, sitting by the edge of the desert, her hair catching the light of the fading sun. Her face was calm, but he could sense the tension in her posture, the way her hands fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. She looked up when she saw him, and for a moment, neither spoke.
"I have to leave for a little while," he said quietly, careful with his words.
Desperation. It's family.
I didn't plan for it, but I need to go.
Her heart sank, though she tried not to show it. She had feared this might happen, yet now that it was real, it hurt more than she expected. "I understand," she whispered, though the words felt fragile. I'll miss you."
He stepped closer, placing a hand gently on hers.
"I'll miss you too," he said softly. "But I want you to know something. I'm not leaving because I want to be away from you. I'm leaving because I have to. And I'll come back." "I promise." She nodded, letting herself believe him, though a small part of her feared the unknown. Trusting someone fully was not easy, and this separation would test that trust in ways neither of them could yet foresee. The next few days were filled with quiet preparation for his departure. They spent time together whenever possible, sharing long walks in the desert, talking late into the night, and savoring the small moments as if trying to store them away in memory. They laughed, shared stories, and even sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Yet, beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension, a fear that distance might weaken the fragile bond they had formed. Finally, the day came for him to leave. The desert was hot, the sun blazing overhead as they met one last time before his journey. They stood close, holding hands, neither wanting to let go but understanding the necessity of the moment. "Promise me something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Brit, promise me you'll come back." He smiled, though his eyes reflected the seriousness of his promise. "I promise," he said firmly. "I'll come back, no matter what." She nodded, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. She knew the separation would not be easy, but she wanted to believe in him, in their connection, and in the hope that their bond could survive the test of distance and time. The weeks that followed were difficult for both of them. She went about her daily life, but every task, every quiet moment in the desert reminded her of him. She missed his voice, the way he listened, and the warmth of his presence. Letters and messages helped, but they could not replace the comfort of shared time, and the nights felt long and empty without him. He, too, struggled with the separation. Work at the family ranch was demanding, and yet his thoughts kept returning to her. Every decision he made, every task he completed. He thought about how he could return to her, how he could prove that his promise was genuine. D'Espagnol was not just about shared laughter or quiet moments. It was about commitment, patience, and the willingness to fight for someone even when circumstances were difficult. During this time, misunderstandings began to creep in. The girl noticed other people speaking about him, outsiders and some community members who did not understand their connection. Rumors, though mild, reached her ears, and she began to worry that his feelings might change, that distance could weaken what they had built. One evening, she walked alone to the familiar clearing in the desert, hoping that being close to the place they had shared would bring comfort. The stars were bright, the desert calm, but she felt the ache of longing more strongly than ever. Narration. She whispered into the night, "I hope he comes back. I hope he keeps his promise." Meanwhile, he was dealing with his own challenges far away. Work pressures, family obligations, and the unfamiliar environment made him question if he could return quickly. Letters and messages to her helped, but he realized that only action, returning, showing consistency, proving care, would truly matter. The distance forced both of them to reflect on what this connection meant, testing their patience, trust, and willingness to hold on to something fragile but real. Finally, after what felt like an eternity to them both, he was able to return. The day of his arrival, she waited near the edge of the desert, her heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness. She had wondered, feared, and hoped in equal measure, and now she would see if the promise he made weeks ago was genuine. He appeared in the distance, walking steadily toward her, dust kicking up behind his boots. She felt her breath catch as he approached, every step bringing relief and joy. When he finally reached her, he stopped a few feet away, allowing her to take in the sight of him, to see that he had returned as promised. "I told you I'd come back," he said quietly, smiling, though there was exhaustion in his eyes from the journey and responsibilities he had carried. She ran the last few steps toward him, throwing her arms around him without hesitation. "Oh, you kept your promise," she whispered against his chest. Relief, joy, and a flood of emotions overcame her. I wasn't sure you would." He held her tightly, feeling the bond between them strengthen with the reunion. "I would never break a promise to you," he said firmly. "You are important to me, more than words can say. In that embrace, all the weeks of separation, worry, and longing melted away." They stood together, letting the desert witness their reunion, the stars above shining like silent witnesses to the connection that had survived trials and distance. That night, under the vast desert sky, they walked slowly to their favorite clearing. The air was cool, the sand soft beneath their feet. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories of what had happened while apart, expressing fears and hopes, and finally allowing themselves to acknowledge the depth of their feelings. The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with both vulnerability and courage.
"I was scared you might leave," she admitted.
"But you came back. You kept me in your heart." Breath.
He nodded, his eyes warm and steady. "Always," he said.
"I never stopped thinking about you. You are worth every step, every challenge, every moment." For the first time in weeks, the girl allowed herself to feel fully at ease. The bond they had nurtured through distance and uncertainty had grown stronger, proving that patience, trust, and genuine care could endure. And in the quiet desert, with only the stars and the gentle wind as witnesses, they shared a silent promise to continue building what they had started, no matter the challenges ahead. The night stretched on, filled with quiet conversation, laughter, and the comfortable presence of someone who had returned after absence, proving that promises were not just words. They were actions, commitment, and heart. And in that shared understanding, they found the reassurance that love could survive trials, distance, and fear if nurtured with patience and respect. The desert seemed to embrace them, the soft night air wrapping around their hearts, as they realized that life, with all its difficulties, had given them a chance to find each other. They would face challenges, yes, but together, with trust and care, they had discovered a bond that was real, deep, and worth protecting. And in that quiet, endless desert night, they knew, no matter what came next, they had each other, and that was enough to face anything. The desert air was calm that evening, carrying the soft scent of sage and the faint warmth of the earth cooled by the setting sun. The Apache girl stood at the edge of the familiar path, her heart fluttering with anticipation, breath. She had spent the past few weeks waiting, hoping, and wondering if he would return as promised. Every step she had taken through the desert, every quiet moment alone had been filled with thoughts of him. And now, finally, he was coming back. In the distance, she saw him walking steadily toward her. His boots kicked up small puffs of dust, and with every step her heart beat faster. She noticed the weariness in his posture, the slight strain of travel, but also the determination in his eyes. He had returned, just as he promised, and that alone filled her with relief and joy. When he reached her, he stopped a few feet away, catching his breath from the journey. His eyes met hers, and for a moment neither spoke. The silence was not awkward. It was filled with understanding, with the recognition that what they had shared had survived distance, challenges, and doubt. Finally, she stepped forward, her hands reaching for his. I was waiting for you, she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. I didn't know if you would really come back. He smiled gently, taking her hands in his, holding them firmly but tenderly.
I told you I would,
He said.
and here I am. I would never leave you, not after all we've shared. The words wrapped around her like a protective blanket.
Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back, letting herself feel the warmth of his promise. They stood together for a long moment, simply holding hands, letting the connection between them speak louder than words ever could. Once the initial emotion had settled, he suggested they walk to their favorite clearing, the place where they had spent so many quiet moments together. She nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. As they walked, their hands remained linked, a physical reminder of the bond they had nurtured through weeks of longing and uncertainty. When they reached the clearing, the sun had fully set, and the first stars of the night appeared twinkling softly in the clear desert sky. The air was cool and soothing, and the silence of the desert seemed to welcome them, offering a private moment for the heart to speak. They sat together on the smooth rock, side by side, watching the stars slowly appear. For a long while they spoke about the days they had been apart, sharing stories, struggles, and reflections. She told him about the quiet moments she had spent thinking of him, the fears she had faced, and the longing that had filled her days. He shared his own challenges, the responsibilities he had carried, and the constant thoughts of her that had kept him going. Every word, every glance, every small smile strengthened their connection, proving that love and trust could endure trials when nurtured with care. Eventually, the conversation shifted to quieter, more intimate thoughts. The girl looked up at him, her eyes reflecting both vulnerability and courage.
I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid that you might change your mind. That distance would make things different.
He shook his head, his eye steady and sincere.
I never doubted us, he said. Distance doesn't change how I feel. I came back because you matter, because we matter.
And I want to prove that to you every day. Her heart swelled at his words. For so long she had been cautious, afraid to open herself fully. But now, seeing his commitment, feeling his presence, she allowed herself to hope, to believe that this bond could truly last. Bright. They stayed in the clearing until the stars shone brightly above the desert quiet, except for the occasional whisper of wind. At one point, she turned to him, a soft smile on her lips. I've been thinking, she said, about us, about what this could mean. He looked at her, his gaze warm and encouraging. And what have you decided? He asked gently. She took a deep breath, feeling the courage that had grown over weeks of reflection and longing. I want to trust you, she said. I want to see where this connection can go.
I want to know that we can face the world together.
He smiled, relief and joy shining in his eyes. Then we will, he said firmly.
We will face everything together, step by step, as equals, with respect and care. I'll never leave your side. The weight of the moment, the sincerity in his words, and the quiet desert around them made her feel a peace she had not known in years. She leaned into him slightly, feeling the warmth of his presence, the steady strength of someone who had returned not just physically but emotionally and wholeheartedly. In the days that followed, their bond continued to grow. They spent time together helping the community, sharing meals and learning more about each other's worlds. He showed genuine interest in her culture, asking questions and listening carefully. She, in turn, shared stories of her family and traditions, watching his reactions and seeing his respect for her heritage. Challenges arose, as they always do in life, but each obstacle they faced only strengthened their connection. When misunderstandings occurred, they spoke openly, resolving them with honesty and patience. When outside opinions threatened to intrude, they relied on the trust they had built to remain steady. Every day, they proved to each other that love was not just about emotion. It was about commitment, respect, and effort. One evening, after a long day of work in the community garden, they walked back to the desert clearing, the sky painted in soft shades of pink and orange from the setting sun. She turned to him, her hand brushing against his arm.
Do you remember what I whispered the first night we were alone here? She asked softly. He nodded, a small smile forming.
How could I forget? She looked into his eyes, a mixture of shyness and certainty in her gaze. I was scared to ask, but now I know the answer, she said.
I asked if you would keep me forever, and you did. You came back, and you've stayed.
Bray. He gently took her hands in his, squeezing them softly. I will keep you forever, he said, breath. Not because you asked, but because I want to. Because you are important to me, in every way. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief and joy of being truly seen, understood, and loved. She had waited, hoped, and feared, and now she realized that love was about patience, trust, and courage. It was about finding someone who would not leave when challenges appeared, someone who would stay and grow together through every difficulty. They sat together in silence for a long while, watching the stars appear one by one. The desert night held them in its quiet embrace, the world around them fading away until only the two of them remained. And in that stillness they felt a connection deeper than words, a bond that had been tested by distance, fear, and uncertainty, but had emerged stronger, resilient, and true. As the weeks turned into months, their lives began to intertwine completely. He became a part of her world, attending community events, helping with family chores, and respecting every tradition she cherished. She, in turn, shared her life fully, trusting him with her thoughts, her fears, and her hopes for the future. Together, they built a life filled with understanding, patience, and shared joy. The desert remained their constant witness, the place where their connection had first deepened, where promises had been whispered, and where love had been tested and proven. Every time they returned to the clearing, they remembered the journey they had taken, the distance, the longing, the fears, and the triumph of trust. And each time they felt gratitude for having found someone willing to stay, to listen, and to love without conditions. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned to gold, the girl looked at him, her eyes shining. I feel safe with you, she said quietly.
Not because nothing bad can happen, but because I know you'll stay no matter what.
He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. That's exactly how I feel about you, he said. Together we can face anything, and I will stay, always. In that moment, surrounded by the vast desert, the stars beginning to appear, and the quiet hum of life around them, they understood the true meaning of love. It was not only passion or fleeting emotion, it was trust, commitment, patience, and the courage to face life together. And so, in the quiet desert night, the Apache girl and the man who had returned as promised stood together, hearts intertwined, knowing that their bond had been forged through trials, strengthened by distance, and sealed by trust. Their journey was not over. Life would continue to bring challenges, but they had learned that together they could face anything, with love, patience, and unwavering care. The desert, eternal and silent, watched over them, a witness to a love that had survived doubt, distance, and fear, and had emerged stronger, steadfast, and enduring. And in that quiet, endless night, they finally understood what it truly meant to belong to someone, and to be truly seen, understood, and loved in return.